The morning shift at St. Mary's General Hospital had just begun when something extraordinary happened. It was 7:15 a.m., and the emergency room was relatively quiet except for the usual morning check-ins. The automatic doors slid open, letting in a blast of cold December air along with a small figure that caught everyone's attention. Sarah Thompson, a 12-year-old girl with untidy brown hair and wearing an oversized winter coat, stood there trembling. In her arms, she carried something wrapped in what appeared to be an old blanket. Her face was pale, and dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept all night. But what made the entire emergency room staff freeze was the tiny whimper that came from the bundle in her arms. Nancy Chen, the head nurse on duty, was the first to react. She had been a nurse for 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of a child bringing in a newborn baby. As she approached Sarah, she noticed the girl's mud-stained sneakers and the way her hands clutched the bundle protectively. "Sweetie, are you all right?" Nancy asked gently, taking slow steps toward Sarah. The girl's eyes darted around the room like a frightened animal looking for escape routes. The baby in her arms made another soft sound, and Sarah adjusted the blanket with surprising tenderness. The baby needs help," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible in the now silent emergency room. Dr. James Peterson, who had been reviewing charts at the nurse's station, quickly made his way over. The situation was unprecedented. Hospital protocol didn't exactly cover what to do when a child brings in an infant. As Nancy carefully led Sarah to the nearest examination room, other staff members began to gather. The girl's appearance had caused quite a stir, and everyone knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary case. The security guard at the front desk was already making calls, while another nurse rushed to prepare an infant examination station. Inside the exam room, Sarah finally allowed Nancy to take a closer look at the baby. As the nurse gently unwrapped the blanket, she discovered a newborn girl, probably no more than a few hours old. The umbilical cord had been cut roughly, tied off with what looked like a shoelace. Despite the amateur care, someone had clearly tried their best to keep the baby clean and warm. "Sarah, can you tell us where you got this baby?" Dr. Peterson asked, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. He noticed how the young girl's eyes never left the infant, even as the medical team began their examination. Sarah shook her head, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Her clothes underneath were wrinkled, as if she'd been wearing them for days. I can't," she stammered, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "Just please help the baby first." The medical team worked quickly but carefully, checking the infant's vital signs and temperature. The baby was slightly cold, but otherwise appeared healthy, a miracle considering the circumstances. As they worked, Nancy stayed close to Sarah, noticing how the girl seemed to be fighting to stay awake. "When was the last time you ate something, honey?" Nancy asked, reaching for a juice box from a nearby cabinet. Sarah just shrugged, her eyes still fixed on the medical team attending to the baby. By now, hospital social worker Maria Ramirez had arrived, along with 2 police officers who waited discreetly outside the room. The situation was delicate. They needed information, but it was clear that Sarah was exhausted and frightened. "The baby's temperature is a little low, but she's stable," Dr. Peterson announced, providing some relief to the tense atmosphere. "She appears to be full-term and healthy, probably born within the last 6 hours." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly at this news, but she remained silent. Maria approached her carefully, pulling up a chair to sit at eye level with the young girl. "Sarah," she said softly, having gotten the girl's name from the nursing staff, "you did the right thing bringing her here. You're not in trouble, but we need to know what happened so we can help both you and the baby." The clock on the wall ticked past 8:00 a.m., marking nearly an hour since Sarah's arrival. Outside the exam room, hospital staff went about their regular duties, but everyone knew that behind that door, an extraordinary story was waiting to be told. Sarah Thompson, this 12-year-old girl who appeared out of nowhere with a newborn baby, was about to reveal something that would shock everyone in St. Mary's General Hospital. The examination room had grown crowded as medical staff worked to stabilize the newborn's temperature. Sarah Thompson sat in a corner chair, her small hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate that Nancy, the head nurse, had insisted she drink. Her eyes hadn't left the baby for even a moment, watching as the medical team connected tiny monitoring devices to the infant's chest. "Her temperature is rising slowly," Dr. Peterson announced, checking the digital thermometer. but we need to get her into the NICU for observation. He gestured to a nurse to prepare the transport incubator, a mobile unit that would keep the baby warm during the move. Sarah suddenly stood up, spilling some of her hot chocolate. No, I need to stay with her. The panic in her voice made everyone in the room pause. Maria Ramirez, the social worker, placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. The baby needs special care right now, Maria explained softly. But I promise you can visit her. First, though, we need to understand what's happening. Can you help us with that? The young girl's face crumpled as she watched the nurses carefully lift the baby into the transport unit. Dark spots of exhaustion under her eyes became more pronounced as tears began to fall. I've been taking care of her, she whispered. I did everything right. I found instructions on the internet. Nancy exchanged worried glances with Dr. Peterson. The idea that this 12-year-old had been following online instructions for newborn care was alarming. The baby's umbilical cord had been tied off with a shoelace, a detail that suggested a completely unassisted birth. As the baby was wheeled toward the door, Sarah tried to follow, but her legs buckled beneath her. Dr. Peterson caught her before she could fall. When was the last time you slept, Sarah? He asked, helping her back to the chair. I don't. Maybe 2 days ago? Sarah's voice was growing fainter. I had to make sure she was breathing every few minutes. The website said that was important. The medical team quickly realized they were dealing with 2 patients, not just one. Nancy took Sarah's vital signs while Maria pulled Dr. Peterson aside. Outside the room, the police officers were growing increasingly concerned about the situation, but everyone agreed that pushing the exhausted girl too hard would be counterproductive. Sarah, Maria said, pulling her chair closer, the baby is going to receive the best care possible, but we're worried about you too, and we need to contact your parents. Can you give us their phone number? The mention of parents caused Sarah to tense up visibly. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself even smaller in the large hospital chair. They're not. They're away on business. They travel a lot. The room grew quiet as the implications of her words sank in. A 12-year-old girl, alone with a newborn baby, no adults present. The situation was becoming more concerning by the minute. Nancy returned with a hospital gown and some clean blankets. Sweetie, why don't we get you cleaned up? You can take a warm shower, change your clothes, and then maybe get some rest. We'll wake you as soon as there's any news about the baby. For the first time since arriving, Sarah seemed to notice her own state. Her clothes were stained with various substances that the medical staff could identify but wished they couldn't. Evidence of her presence during the birth. She looked down at her mud-covered sneakers and dirty jeans, then back at Nancy's kind face. But what if she needs me? Sarah's voice cracked with exhaustion and worry. I promised I wouldn't leave her alone. Maria stepped in. Who did you promise, Sarah? Was it your sister? A friend? Sarah's eyes widened in panic, and she pressed her lips together tightly. The question had struck a nerve, but she wasn't ready to answer. Dr. Peterson recognized the signs of a child reaching her breaking point. Let's take this one step at a time, he suggested. Sarah needs rest, and the baby is being well cared for in the NICU. We can sort out the details after both of our patients are stable. As Nancy led Sarah toward the private bathroom, the young girl stopped at the door and turned back. Her name, she said quietly, I've been calling her Hope, because that's what she needs right now. The simple statement hung in the air as Sarah disappeared into the bathroom. The medical staff shared knowing looks. They were dealing with something far more complex than just an abandoned baby. Whatever had brought Sarah Thompson to their emergency room that morning, it was clear that the real story was only beginning to unfold. After a warm shower and change of clothes, Sarah looked smaller than ever in the hospital bed they had provided for her. Though exhausted, she fought against sleep, her eyes constantly drifting toward the door. Maria Ramirez sat quietly nearby, waiting for the right moment to continue their conversation. The silence was broken by Dr. Peterson's return. The baby, Hope, is doing well, he announced, watching relief flood Sarah's face. Her temperature is normal now, and she's taking formula. But Sarah, we really need to understand where she came from. There's another mother out there who might need medical attention. Sarah's fingers twisted in the hospital blanket. The mention of another mother seemed to break something inside her. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, and this time she couldn't stop them. It's Emma, she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "My sister Emma. She's really sick, and I didn't know what to do anymore." The revelation sent immediate waves of action through the room. Dr. Peterson reached for his phone while Maria moved closer to Sarah's bed. "Where is Emma now, sweetheart?" Maria asked urgently. "In our basement. I tried to help her, I really did." Sarah's words came rushing out like a dam breaking. "She made me promise not to tell anyone, but after the baby came, Emma wouldn't stop bleeding, and she's so hot with fever, I got scared." Within minutes, an emergency response team was dispatched to the Thompson residence. Sarah provided their address with trembling hands, then continued her story, as if once started, she couldn't stop. "Emma is 14. She found out she was pregnant 6 months ago," Sarah explained, her young face showing wisdom far beyond her years. "Our parents are always traveling for work. They're in Singapore right now. They've been gone for 3 weeks. Emma said we couldn't tell them because they'd be angry." Maria and Dr. Peterson exchanged concerned glances. The picture was becoming clearer. 2 young girls, essentially alone, dealing with something no child should have to face. "We read everything we could find online," Sarah continued. "Emma wore loose clothes to school, and nobody noticed. We thought we had it all figured out. Emma said we'd give the baby up for adoption quietly, and our parents would never know." Dr. Peterson's phone buzzed. The emergency team had reached the Thompson house. "They found Emma," he announced after a brief conversation. "She's unconscious but alive. They're bringing her in now." Sarah tried to jump out of bed, but Maria gently held her back. "Your sister needs immediate medical attention," she explained. "The best thing you can do for her now is tell us everything so we can help her properly." Through her tears, Sarah revealed the full story. Emma had been assaulted at a party by an older boy. Scared and ashamed, she had confided in only her younger sister. The girls had managed to hide the pregnancy through baggy clothes and careful planning, using their parents' frequent absences to their advantage. "Last night, Emma said the baby was coming," Sarah explained, her voice growing hoarse. "We had watched videos about delivery, but it was so much worse than we thought. Emma screamed into pillows so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I helped clean the baby like the videos showed, but then Emma started shaking and burning up." The emergency team arrived with Emma, and the hospital burst into action. The older girl was immediately rushed to surgery, while Sarah watched helplessly from her room. Dr. Peterson returned briefly to update them. Emma had developed a severe infection from the unsterile delivery conditions. "You saved both their lives," Maria told Sarah softly. "By bringing hope to the hospital when you did, you led us to Emma in time. You did the right thing, even though it was hard." Sarah finally allowed herself to lie back in the bed, the weight of her secret lifting but replaced by new worries. "Our parents," she started. "We've reached them in Singapore," Maria assured her. "They're flying home immediately. But right now, you need to rest. Emma is getting the care she needs. Hope is safe and healthy, and you don't have to handle this alone anymore." As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, the hospital staff moved quietly around her. News of the Thompson sisters' story spread through the hospital, leaving everyone amazed at the courage of a 12-year-old girl who had carried such a heavy burden. In trying to protect her sister, Sarah had shown wisdom and strength that put many adults to shame. Outside her room, Dr. Peterson updated the police officers and social workers gathering there. This case would need careful handling, not just medical care, but also understanding how 2 young girls had ended up in such a desperate situation and ensuring it never happened again. The emergency room at St. Mary's General Hospital erupted into controlled chaos as Emma Thompson was wheeled in on a gurney. Her skin was burning hot to the touch, her breathing shallow, and her pulse racing dangerously fast. Dr. Peterson and his team moved swiftly, knowing that every minute counted in cases of postpartum sepsis. Temperature 104.2 called out a nurse as they transferred Emma to a trauma bay. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate 130 and climbing. The 14-year-old girl looked tiny and fragile on the hospital bed, her dark hair matted with sweat against her forehead. The basement where she had given birth had been far from sterile, and now her body was paying the price. "Start her on broad-spectrum antibiotics," Dr. Peterson ordered, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "We need blood cultures, complete blood count, and prep an ore. She's showing signs of septic shock." Down the hall, Sarah had woken up from her brief rest and was fighting with Maria to let her see her sister. "Please," she begged. "I need to be there. I've been taking care of her all this time." Nancy, the head nurse who had first received Sarah and baby Hope, appeared in the doorway. "Your sister is very sick," she explained gently. "The doctors need space to work, but I can give you updates every 15 minutes, I promise." The next few hours became a blur of activity. Emma was rushed into emergency surgery when the medical team discovered retained placental tissue, common cause of postpartum infection. Sarah paced her room, counting the minutes between Nancy's updates, while baby Hope remained stable in the NICU. The Thompson parents were somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, having boarded the first available flight from Singapore. The police had secured their house as a potential crime scene, focusing on identifying the person responsible for Emma's assault. But right now, all that mattered was saving the young mother's life. Dr. Peterson worked tirelessly in the operating room, his experienced hands moving swiftly to repair the damage caused by the unassisted birth. "She tried to handle this alone," he muttered to the OR nurse assisting him. "She's just a child herself." The surgery revealed the full extent of what Emma had endured. Evidence of tearing that had never been properly treated, signs of malnutrition, and the terrible aftermath of trying to hide her condition for so long. The medical team worked methodically, fighting to reverse the cascade of complications threatening the young girl's life. Back in her room, Sarah had finally been convinced to eat something. As she picked at a sandwich, she shared more details with Maria about the past 6 months. How they had used their allowance to buy prenatal vitamins secretly from different stores. How Emma had worn their father's old sweatshirts to hide her growing belly. How they had studied medical websites late into the night, trying to prepare for something they couldn't possibly handle alone. "Emma made me practice tying knots," Sarah said quietly, staring at her hands. "That's why I used a shoelace for the cord. We couldn't buy real medical supplies because someone might tell our parents." Maria felt her heart break for these two girls who had carried such an impossible burden. "You did everything you could," she assured Sarah. "Now it's time to let the doctors help." After 4 tense hours, Dr. Peterson emerged from surgery. His scrubs were sweat-stained, but his eyes were hopeful as he headed to Sarah's room. The young girl looked up at him with tears in her eyes, bracing herself for news. "Emma made it through surgery," he announced, watching relief flood Sarah's face. "She's very sick, and recovery will take time, but we got to her in time. Thanks to you, Sarah." For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Sarah broke down completely. Not the quiet tears from before, but deep, racking sobs that shook her small frame. Maria held her while she cried, understanding that these were tears of relief, fear, and released tension all at once. Emma was moved to intensive care, where machines monitored her vital signs and powerful antibiotics fought the infection raging through her body. The medical team remained cautiously optimistic, knowing that young patients often showed remarkable resilience. As night fell over St. Mary's General, 3 Thompson girls rested in different parts of the hospital. Emma in intensive care, beginning her long fight toward recovery. Baby Hope in the NICU, growing stronger by the hour, and Sarah, finally sleeping deeply, no longer carrying the weight of her family's secret alone. The race against time had been won, but the journey of healing was just beginning for the Thompson family. The Thompson parents arrived at St. Mary's General Hospital looking shell-shocked and disheveled after their 20-hour flight from Singapore. Linda and Robert Thompson, both successful corporate executives, stood in the hospital lobby struggling to comprehend how their perfectly ordered world had shattered during their absence. Dr. Peterson met them in a private consultation room, where Maria Ramirez was already waiting. The parents sat close together, holding hands tightly as they learned the full extent of what their daughters had endured. "Emma is stable but still critical," Dr. Peterson explained carefully. "The infection is responding to antibiotics, but her recovery will take time. Sarah is physically fine but emotionally exhausted, and her granddaughter, who they've named Hope, is doing well in our neonatal unit." Linda Thompson pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Granddaughter," she whispered, the word foreign on her tongue. "Our Emma is just a baby herself. How did we not know? How did we not see this?" As the story unfolded, a pattern emerged that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. The Thompsons spent an average of 20 days each month traveling for work. The girls had been left mainly in the care of a housekeeper who came 3 times a week to clean and stock the fridge. Emma and Sarah had learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity. The assault happened at a classmate's party in June, Maria had explained, referring to her notes from Sarah's account. Emma was too afraid to tell anyone. She didn't think you would believe her, and she worried it would disappoint you. Robert Thompson's face darkened with anger and guilt. Who did this to my daughter? I want names. I want them arrested. The police are investigating, Maria assured him. But right now, your daughters need you more than anything else. The details of the past 6 months emerged like a horror story. Emma had discovered her pregnancy during one of her parents' extended business trips. Sarah, only 12 but already accustomed to problem-solving in their parents' absence, had helped her sister research their options online. They used your Amazon account to order loose clothes, Maria continued. They deleted the purchased history afterward. Emma took online classes for the last 2 months, claiming she had mono. Sarah handled all the communication with the school, imitating your email style so perfectly that no one questioned it. Linda began to cry softly as she realized how their pursuit of corporate success had left their children vulnerable. We thought we were providing them with everything they needed, she said. The best schools, the best opportunities. What they needed was their parents. Dr. Peterson said gently but firmly. They needed adults they could trust and turn to in a crisis. The Thompsons were then taken to see their daughters. Emma lay in intensive care, still sedated, looking impossibly young in the hospital bed. Machines beat steadily, monitoring her vital signs as antibiotics dripped into her veins. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside her sister, having refused to be separated from Emma once she was moved out of critical care. In the NICU, they met their granddaughter for the first time. Hope Thompson was gaining strength, her tiny fingers gripping Robert's pinky with surprising strength as he reached into the incubator. Linda couldn't stop the tears as she watched her husband gently touch the baby's hand, seeing decades of carefully constructed plans and expectations crumble in the face of this new reality. The police detective handling the case arrived later that afternoon. She explained that they had identified the boy responsible for Emma's assault, a 17-year-old who had since moved to another state. Arrest warrants were being prepared, and charges would be filed. As evening approached, Sarah finally woke up and faced her parents. The 12-year-old who had shown such extraordinary courage looked suddenly young and uncertain. "Are you mad at us?" she asked in a small voice. Linda gathered her younger daughter into her arms, holding her close. "No, sweetheart. We're mad at ourselves. We should have been here. We should have noticed. We should have been the parents you deserved." Robert joined the embrace, his usual corporate confidence replaced by humility and regret. "Things are going to change," he promised. "No more extended trips. No more leaving you girls alone. We're going to be a real family." As night fell over the hospital, the Thompson family began their long journey toward healing. Not just Emma's physical recovery, but the deeper wounds that had allowed this situation to develop in the first place. Their carefully constructed facade of success had crumbled, revealing the true cost of their choices. The news of the Thompson case spread through the city's child protective services like wildfire. Karen Matthews, the lead case investigator, sat at her desk reviewing the thick file that had been compiled over the past 48 hours. We need to handle this carefully, Karen told her team during their morning briefing. These girls showed remarkable resilience, but they should never have been in this situation. We need to understand how this slipped through every safety net we have. The investigation revealed a troubling pattern. Emma and Sarah Thompson had perfected the art of appearing perfectly fine to the outside world. Their teachers reported them as excellent students. The housekeeper described them as independent and mature. Neighbors praised them as polite and well-behaved. No one had looked closely enough to see the desperation behind their carefully maintained facade. At the hospital, Dr. Peterson met with the child welfare team. "Emma's physical recovery is progressing well," he reported, "but both girls show signs of long-term stress and anxiety. They've been functioning as adults for far too long." The Thompson parents sat through hours of interviews with social services. Linda and Robert Thompson's corporate success story now read like a cautionary tale of career ambition overshadowing parental responsibility. Their calendar for the past year showed they had been present in their home less than 1/3 of the time. "We understand you need to make changes," Karen explained to the parents. But we're legally required to investigate any case of neglect, regardless of intent. The girls will need to be interviewed, and we'll be monitoring the situation closely. The media caught wind of the story, though the girls' identities were protected due to their age. Local news channels ran segments about teen pregnancy and parental absence. The hospital's switchboard was flooded with calls from concerned citizens and advocacy groups. Sarah, still protecting her sister even with their parents present, spoke with the investigators first. She described their elaborate system of managing school communications, doctor's appointments, and household needs. The social workers were stunned by the level of organization two young girls had maintained to keep their secret. We had spreadsheets, Sarah explained, showing them her laptop. Emma made charts for everything: when to take vitamins, when to buy larger clothes, which stores were safe to shop at where no one would recognize us. The school system launched its own internal investigation: how had a pregnant 14-year-old managed to hide her condition for so long? The answer was a combination of online classes, forged emails, and a system that was too overwhelmed to notice the subtle signs of crisis. The police investigation progressed simultaneously. Detective Lisa Rodriguez interviewed Emma once she was strong enough, gathering details about the assault that had started this chain of events. The perpetrator, now in custody in another state, would face serious charges. Child psychologist Dr. Amanda Chen began working with both girls. They developed an unusual bond through this trauma, she reported to the welfare team. Sarah essentially became a parent figure to both her sister and her niece. We need to help her return to being a 12-year-old while maintaining her close relationship with Emma. The hospital's ethics committee convened to discuss the case. Questions arose about medical privacy for minors, mandatory reporting requirements, and how to better identify at-risk youth. The Thompson case was becoming a catalyst for systemic change. Linda and Robert Thompson met with family court officials to present their plan for family restructuring. They had both submitted their resignations from their international positions, accepting local jobs that would keep them home. They hired a family therapist and arranged for regular check-ins with social services. We know we have to earn back the right to care for our daughters, Linda told the judge, her corporate polish cracking under the weight of emotion. We're prepared to do whatever it takes. As the various agencies and systems responded to the Thompson case, Sarah and Emma remained each other's strongest support. In their hospital room, they'd rarely left each other's side, united by their shared experience and the bond that had grown even stronger through their ordeal. Baby Hope, unaware of the waves she had caused, continued to thrive in the NICU. Her existence had exposed serious gaps in multiple systems designed to protect young people, and now those systems were scrambling to adapt and improve. The Thompson case would eventually become a case study in social work programs and medical schools, an example of how easily vulnerable children could slip through the cracks, and a reminder of the importance of really seeing the young people in their care. Emma Thompson's hospital room had slowly transformed over the past 2 weeks. Get well cards from classmates lined the windowsill, colorful balloons floated in corners, and a small stuffed bear sat on her bedside table. The sterile hospital environment had become a space of healing, both physical and emotional. Dr. Peterson checked Emma's latest test results with satisfaction. The infection is completely cleared, he told the gathered family. Your body has fought back remarkably well. Emma managed a small smile, her first in days. Beside her bed, Sarah beamed with pride at her sister's progress. The most significant change came when the nurses brought Baby Hope from the NICU for her first extended visit with her mother. Emma, still weak but determined, held her daughter with trembling arms. Sarah hovered nearby, ready to help, but forcing herself to step back, a new challenge for the young girl who had been everyone's protector for so long. You're doing great, the lactation consultant encouraged Emma as she helped her position Hope for feeding. The 14-year-old mother's hands shook less each day as she learned to care for her baby under proper medical supervision. The shame that had driven her into hiding was slowly being replaced by determination to do things right. Linda Thompson had taken leave from work and practically lived at the hospital, trying to make up for lost time. She sat quietly in the corner, watching her daughters with hope, her heart aching at how much she had missed. They've grown up so fast, she whispered to Maria Ramirez, who still checked in daily. I barely recognize them sometimes. The story of Sarah's bravery had spread throughout the hospital. Staff members who had been present when she first arrived with Hope stopped by to check on the family. Many brought small gifts or words of encouragement. The security guard who had been on duty that morning always saved an extra pudding cup from the cafeteria for Sarah. Dr. Amanda Chen, the child psychologist, worked with both girls daily. Sarah struggled to let go of her role as primary caregiver, while Emma battled feelings of guilt for having burdened her younger sister with such adult responsibilities. Together, they began to process the trauma of the past months. "It's okay to be kids again," Dr. Chen reminded them gently during a family session. "You've both been incredibly strong, but now there are adults here to help carry the weight." Robert Thompson had transformed from a distant corporate figure into an actively involved father. He sat through every medical consultation, took notes during the baby care classes, and spent hours just talking with his daughters, something he realized he had rarely done before. The police investigation brought closure as well. The boy responsible for Emma's assault had been arrested and would face charges. Emma's testimony, given with Sarah holding her hand, helped ensure he would be held accountable. The detectives who handled the case were amazed by the young girl's courage in telling her story. Hope proved stronger each day in the NICU. The nurses nicknamed her Sunshine because of how she seemed to brighten everyone's mood. Even the most seasoned medical professionals found themselves spending extra time with the baby who had arrived in such extraordinary circumstances. Sarah's school sent a tutor to help her catch up on missed classes. To everyone's surprise, she hadn't fallen far behind. She had somehow managed to keep up with her studies even while caring for Emma and Hope. Her teachers were amazed by her resilience. The media continued to show interest in the story, but the hospital staff formed a protective barrier around the family. Local community groups reached out with offers of support, from meal deliveries to baby supplies. The Thompsons, once isolated in their crisis, found themselves surrounded by a network of care. As Emma's discharge date approached, the family began preparing for their new normal. The Thompson home had been transformed. The basement where Hope was born was renovated, Emma's room was adapted for baby care, and Sarah's space was filled with age-appropriate decorations, encouraging her to reclaim her childhood. One evening, as the sisters sat together with Hope sleeping peacefully between them, Emma finally found the words she had been searching for. "Thank you," she told Sarah softly. "You saved us both. You're my hero." Sarah, for once, didn't deflect the praise or jump up to check on something. She simply leaned against her sister's shoulder and watched her niece sleep. The healing process was far from over, but in that quiet moment, both girls felt the first real sense of peace they had known in months. Hope stirred in her sleep, and both sisters automatically reached to comfort her, then caught themselves and shared a small laugh. They were learning that it was okay to let others help, okay to be young, okay to heal. 6 months after the day Sarah Thompson walked into St. Mary's General Hospital with a newborn baby, the Thompson family gathered in their living room for a special celebration. Baby Hope, now thriving in health. Emma, who had just turned 15, looked different from the scared girl who had hidden her pregnancy. She had returned to regular classes 3 months ago and was excelling in her studies. With the support of a teen parent program at school, she was learning to balance motherhood with education. "Watch this," Emma said proudly, holding up a rattle. Hope's eyes tracked the toy, and her tiny hands grabbed it with surprising strength. The room filled with warm laughter, a sound that had become increasingly common in the Thompson household. Sarah, now 13, had also transformed. No longer carrying the weight of adult responsibilities, she had joined the school's science club and started taking art classes. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by the natural energy of a young teenager. Though she remained protective of her sister and niece, she had learned to be a supportive aunt rather than a substitute parent. Linda and Robert Thompson had kept their promise to change. They had both taken local positions that allowed them to be home every evening. Family dinner had become a nightly ritual where everyone shared their day's experiences. The corporate trips that once dominated their calendar had been replaced by family outings and therapy appointments. The occasion for today's gathering was bittersweet. After months of counseling and consideration, Emma had made the difficult decision to place Hope for adoption. The chosen family, Mark and Jennifer Carter, were also present at the celebration. "We want you to remain part of Hope's life," Jennifer told Emma and Sarah, holding back tears. She should know the amazing story of how her aunt and mother protected her from the very beginning. The adoption would be open, allowing the Thompson sisters to maintain contact with Hope as she grew up. The Carters lived just 30 minutes away and had already integrated themselves into Hope's daily routine over the past month. Dr. Peterson and Maria Ramirez had been invited to the gathering as well. They had become more than just medical professionals to the family. They were witnesses to both the darkest and brightest moments of the Thompsons' journey. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most loving ones. Maria observed quietly as they watched Emma carefully hand Hope to Jennifer. The young mother's face showed both pain and peace. She knew she was giving her daughter the stability and resources she needed. Sarah sat close to her sister during the transition, their hands clasped tightly. Though she had initially struggled with the adoption decision, she had come to understand that this was part of healing too. "We'll still see her all the time," she whispered to Emma. "And now we can both focus on growing up ourselves." The Thompson parents had supported Emma's choice, recognizing that their daughter's wisdom in making this decision showed more maturity than they had often displayed themselves. They had promised to be better parents to both their girls, and part of that meant supporting Emma's careful consideration of Hope's future. Linda had arranged for a photographer to capture the day. "These aren't just pictures," she explained. "They're the beginning of Hope's story, one she'll grow up knowing. She'll understand how much love surrounded her from her very first moments." As the afternoon progressed, the gathering took on the atmosphere of a family reunion rather than a farewell. The Carters shared their plans for Hope's nursery, complete with photos of Emma and Sarah on the walls. They had already scheduled regular visits and holiday celebrations. Before the Carters left with Hope, everyone gathered for one last photo. Emma held Hope one more time, with Sarah beside her. The Carter family stood close by, and the Thompson parents completed the circle. In that moment, they weren't two separate families. They were Hope's family, expanded and strengthened by love and sacrifice. "This isn't an ending," Emma said softly as she kissed Hope's forehead. "It's a new chapter. We're all just taking our right places in the story." As the sun set on this milestone day, the Thompson house felt different from the lonely place it had been 6 months ago. Though Hope would now live with the Carters, her presence had transformed everyone she had touched. The secrets and fear that had once filled these rooms had been replaced by honesty, healing, and hope for the future. Sarah looked around at her family, changed but stronger, separated but connected, and finally felt like a 13-year-old girl again. The weight she had carried was lifted, but the love remained, growing into something new and beautiful.